Fraction Intelligence. Welcome to the show. Fraction Intelligence. Minds about to blow. Fraction Intelligence. Where the questions flow. Fraction Intelligence. Now it's time to grow.
Fraction Intelligence. Welcome to the unknown.
This is Fractured Intelligence. Welcome to the show. On today's episode, we are talking about infinity and what it really means.
Okay, so get this right. Today we are diving headfirst into, well, infinity.
Which is always a fun way to spend an afternoon.
And we're not just talking about like, oh, it goes on forever, but like, what if infinity is actually the starting point of literally everything?
Bold statement.
I know, right? But that's what this Gregory Betti guy is putting forward in Unveiling Infinity. This book, by the way, it really messed with my head in the best way possible.
It definitely makes you think about existence a little differently, that's for sure. You know, it's funny how often infinity gets reduced to this kind of abstract idea from math class.
Totally, like, oh yeah, infinity, that thing from calculus I barely passed.
But Betti throws this curveball.
Yeah.
An equation, no less, that basically says everything, and I mean everything, comes from an infinite source.
Hold up, equation. You know I'm more of a word person.
Right. Okay, but it's actually pretty elegant. X F you.
Okay, before we lose half our listeners, can we translate that for those of us who don't speak advanced math?
Absolutely. Imagine a cookbook, right? But instead of just a few hundred recipes, this one has infinite pages. Infinite recipes. That's art at the infinite source.
Okay, I think I'm following. So what are all the X's then? Like ingredients in this cosmic cookbook?
You got it. Each X represents every single thing in the universe. Stars, planets, you, me, even that coffee you had this morning. All different dishes made from the same infinite cookbook.
Wow. Okay, so everything we can see, touch, even be is just a different expression of this one infinite thing.
That's the gist of it.
My mind is kind of blown right now. But so Betti's not just pulling this out of thin air, is he? He connects this to how people have thought about infinity throughout history.
Oh, absolutely. The ancients, they were grappling with this stuff long before we had calculators and supercomputers. The Greeks, for instance, obsessed with the endlessness of numbers.
Right. And weren't there Indian philosophers who talked about consciousness as being boundless, infinite?
Exactly. They understood that infinity wasn't just some mathematical curiosity. It was deeply tied to big questions about existence and reality.
Okay, so we've got ancient philosophers staring into the abyss, and then boom, here comes the 19th century, and this guy, Georg Cantor, didn't he basically reinvent infinity as we know it?
Cantor was a total game changer. See, before him, people thought of infinity as this, like, absolute unreachable thing. One size fits all.
Right, like infinity is infinity. End of story.
Right. But Cantor shows up and proves that there are actually different levels of infinity, different sizes. It's wild.
Okay, you officially lost me. Different sizes of infinity. I'm going to need some visuals for that one.
It's some seriously complex math, but trust me, it's mind-blowing stuff.
Okay. So how does Betti's equation fit into all of this? Is he saying he's found the biggest infinity of all time?
It's not so much about finding the biggest, but about making connections. Betti's basically saying, hey, we've been trying to understand infinity for centuries, right? What if this new equation is the key to connecting those ancient ideas with the crazy things we're discovering in modern science?
Okay, and I know you're going to say black holes.
Had to, right? Black holes, the Big Bang places, where our current understanding of physics completely breaks down. It's like the universe is saying, nope, your rules don't apply here.
Exactly. And then there's that whole other can of worms, quantum mechanics, where particles are just doing whatever they want, popping in and out of existence, communicating across vast distances instantaneously. It makes my brain hurt.
And Betti's argument is that maybe, just maybe, this equation, this idea of everything coming from an infinite source, maybe it's the missing link, the bridge between these seemingly impossible concepts.
So are you saying infinity isn't just some theory? It could be the answer to, like, everything.
It's a bold claim, for sure. And not everyone's buying it. But that's what makes this so fascinating.
This is where things get really interesting for me. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole, we've talked about the science, but what about The philosophy of it all.
Ah, yes. The million-dollar question.
Hmm.
Because if everything does come from this infinite source, it makes you think about some pretty mind-blowing concepts. Ideas like pantheism, non-duality.
Okay, we are going to need a whole other episode for that. Actually, let's just pick that up after the break because I need a minute to process all of this.
Okay.
Okay, so before we went down that rabbit hole of infinity and equations and blew up our understanding of physics, we were starting to talk about the philosophical side of things.
We were just getting to the good stuff.
Right, like pantheism and non-duality. Words that sound like they belong in a philosophy textbook, but if Betty's right, maybe they're just describing, well, reality.
It's like suddenly those abstract concepts become potential frameworks for understanding our place in all of this.
Okay, so level with me here. What exactly is pantheism? And how does it connect to this idea of an infinite source?
In a nutshell, pantheism blurs the line between the universe and the divine. So instead of a separate supernatural God, pantheists believe that the universe itself is divine.
So, like, everything is God.
Kind of. Every galaxy, every tree, even my coffee cup, it's all part of this one interconnected infinite source. And because of that, it's all considered sacred, divine.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So Betty's equation, it's almost like mathematical proof for that interconnectedness.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, what if those ancient mystics were actually onto something? What if we can express those spiritual insights with an equation?
Mind blown. Okay, so that's pantheism, the universe is God. But you also mentioned something called non-duality. Now, that one always trips me up.
Right. Imagine a single drop of water falling into the ocean,
Yeah.
right? For a second, it holds its shape, it's its own thing. But really, it was always part of something bigger. It was always the ocean.
Okay, I'm listening.
Non-duality is like that.
Hmm.
It says that our sense of separation from the universe, from each other, it's an illusion. We're all part of this one big, messy, interconnected everything.
And Betty's equation supports that by saying that we all come from the same source.
Exactly. It's not you and me and the universe. It's just one big cosmic soup, all stemming from the same infinite point.
You know, this is where it gets really interesting to me. Because if that's true, if we're all connected like that, what does it mean for consciousness?
That's the big question, isn't it? Betty doesn't claim to have all the answers, but he suggests that this could change how we think about consciousness entirely.
Instead of it just being something our brains produce, it's a fundamental part of reality itself.
Precisely. What if consciousness isn't something we have, but something we are? Something that's woven into the very fabric of existence.
Okay, I'm going to need a minute to wrap my head around that one. But before we spiral into an existential crisis, we've talked about the big cosmic implications, but what about everyday life? Does this actually change anything?
You bet it does. That's what's so cool at this concept. It's not just theoretical. Think about art, for instance.
Okay, I'm not sure I see the connection between some mathematical equation about infinity and like a painting or a song.
But artists, writers, musicians, they've always been drawn to the infinite, haven't they? Trying to capture it, express it, make us feel it.
Right, but how does that connect to Betty's idea?
Well, what if they're not just depicting the infinite, but channeling it? What if those bursts of creativity are coming directly from that infinite source?
So it's not just about appreciating art differently, it's about recognizing that same infinite potential within ourselves.
Yes, and it goes way beyond art. Imagine the impact this could have on everything. Relationships, personal growth, how we approach challenges.
Like, if we really believed we were connected to an infinite source, we'd be less afraid to take risks, to push our limits.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that wellspring of creativity and resilience that comes from knowing we're part of something so much greater than ourselves.
That's a pretty empowering thought. But let's be real, not everyone's going to be convinced by all of this, right? I mean, there have to be some people saying, hold on, this is getting a little too out there.
Of course. Betti himself acknowledges that. Some scientists say it's impossible to actually test such a broad claim about reality. Like, where do you even begin to measure infinity?
Right, it's like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Exactly. And then there are those who say this whole thing is veering too far into philosophy, that it's not really science anymore.
Which is a fair point. It's definitely pushing the boundaries of what we traditionally consider scientific.
Exactly. But that's what makes it so exciting. It's pushing us to confront the limits of what we know and to consider possibilities we might have dismissed before.
It's like Betty's thrown open the doors to a whole new way of seeing ourselves in the universe. And whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny that it's a pretty incredible journey.
And speaking of journeys, The most amazing thing about Betty's work is where it leaves us.
So we've gone on this wild ride from like ancient Greece to modern physics, from black holes to, well, the very essence of being.
And through it all, this idea of infinity, of an infinite source,
Yeah.
it's kind of been the connecting thread.
It is. It's a lot to process, to be honest. So I'm wondering, where do we even go from here?
Well, that's the beauty of Betty's work. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Oh, good. Because at this point, I think I have more questions than answers.
He does, however, leave us with some really big questions, thought-provoking questions that keep this exploration going.
Like a trail of breadcrumbs leading further into the forest.
That's a great way to put it. And the central question Betty asks is this: if everything is an expression of infinity, what possibilities does that open up for us, both as individuals and as a species?
Wow. Okay, that's a big one. It's like suddenly all the rules we thought were set in stone, they're gone.
Exactly. All those limitations we put on ourselves, all those I can'ts and what ifs, it's like, why even bother with those anymore?
If we're tapping into something infinite, then maybe our potential is infinite too.
That's what Betty's getting at. What could we achieve? What problems could we solve if we truly embrace that idea?
It's almost like he's saying, hey, we're just getting started. This whole infinity thing, it's not a dead end, it's an open door.
It is. And maybe stepping through that door starts with changing how we think, how we see the world, how we see ourselves.
Embrace the mystery, the unknown. I like it.
And remember that feeling of awe, like when you look up at a sky full of stars. Betty wants us to carry that feeling with us, to let it inspire us to live bigger, bolder lives.
To embrace those infinite possibilities. Man, I need to reread this book about 10 more times.
I'm right there with you. Yeah. It's the kind of book that stays with you long after you finish the last page.
Well, listeners, we've definitely gone deep down the rabbit hole with this one, but hopefully we've given you a lot to think about. A new way of looking at infinity, at existence, maybe even at yourselves.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, never lose that sense of wonder. Who knows what you might discover?